Harbor Freight is one of those places where there's always a good deal, you just have to dig a little. And I go there about 3 to 4 times a year, going down every single aisle trying to find the best deals available. And it's really not that easy, as a lot of times you have to look on the very top shelf or the very bottom shelf to find those unique gems. But today I did the dirty work for you, finding all of those unique treasures that you just don't see that often. So let's do a deep dive and let me show you some of my favorite tools I've found in the last 4 months in this compilation video. So if you're like me, you're always on the hunt trying to find a great deal on quality tools that won't break the bank. And Harbor Freight seems to be the ideal place from this, everything from hammers to clamps to even power tools. And because I spend my own money on all my tools, I can give you an honest opinion of some of the gems I found at Harbor Freight. So let's not waste any more time and take a look at these hidden gems that I found over the last 4 months at Harbor Freight in this compilation video. This is the Bremen 12-inch trigger clamp and spreader. Let's give it a look. Speaking of spreaders, there's only one piece of John Deere equipment that I do not stand behind, and that's their manure spreader. So Bremen is a brand that I've had some experience with, and frankly I've been quite impressed, as I purchased some parallel clamps a few months ago and I've already used these on a couple of projects. But you do have to be careful as to what clamps you pick off the shelf, as one of my 2 sets of parallel clamps had a bent bar. So I spent a little more time reviewing this quick clamp before I put it in my cart. So let's take a closer look at why I picked up this 12-inch trigger clamp and spreader. One of the first things you'll notice about this clamp is it's got one of the most ergonomic grips I've ever seen on a quick clamp. Not only does this clamp have a cutout for your thumb, but it also has 4 notches for each one of your fingers. And this trigger clamp works like any other quick clamp by simply depressing the orange trigger to clamp it down. And to release the clamp, it's just as easy. By simply depressing that black tab right in front of that orange trigger, it opens up that clamp. And the clamping force of this clamp is really quite impressive, having a clamping force of 375 pounds. And the body of the clamp feels very high quality, as it's made from sturdy reinforced nylon. If we look at the bar of the clamp, you can see it's just as high quality, as it's got an I-beam construction that prevents flexing and bowing. But let's take a closer look at the clamping jaws. As you can see, just like any other quick clamp, it's got a pad on each one of the faces of those jaws. And the clamping capacity is really quite impressive, having a throat depth of 3 3/16 of an inch. But as I mentioned earlier, this is not only a clamp, but also a spreader. Let's take a look at how that works. To convert this clamp to a spreader, it has everything to do with this little orange tab on the side. By simply depressing that orange tab, the front jaw is easily removed. And once you have the front jaw removed, all you need to do is to slide it onto the other side until you hear that orange tab click into place. And just like that, you've instantly converted this clamp into a spreader, which has got to be one of the easiest clamp conversions that I've ever seen. And for this reason alone, I can totally understand why this Bremen 12-inch trigger clamp has gone viral, especially when you consider the price of just $9.99 for each one of these clamps. But we're just getting started. Let's move on to our next viral Harbor Freight tool for less than 15 bucks. This is the US General Magnetic Hanging Tray. Let's give it a look. Hanging? You know your mama's so ugly her portraits hang themselves. So this is an item I had no idea about, and when I saw it on the shelves, I knew I had to give it a look. And it was really hard for me to make a decision on what I wanted to get, as there was a ton of different variations of this tool. But in the end, I selected something that best fits my needs for my shop. Let's give it a quick look. So at first glance, this may look like any other tool tray that you might find at a hardware store, but it has some unique features. One of the first things you may notice on this tray are the 3 small holes on either side of the tray. These holes are made so that you can place up to 6 screwdrivers or similar items on each side of the tray. And if we look at the tray itself, not only does it have a lip on the very front to prevent things from falling out, but it has a pretty large footprint, having a depth of about 4.5 inches and a width of 12 inches. But none of these features are what make this tray unique. To understand that, we need to flip the tray around. Not only does this tray have 4 powerful rubber-coated magnets on the back, but it also has a rubber lip on the very bottom. It's these magnets that allow you to attach this magnetic tray to any magnetic surface, like a metal door or even a metal file cabinet. And once in place, you can begin to add your tools like 3 screwdrivers on either side of the tray. But screwdrivers aren't the only thing that this tray can accommodate, as you can add up to 7.5 pounds right on top of that tray of supplies and materials. And because of this hanging tray's flexibility and versatility, I can totally understand why this item has become viral from Harbor Freight, especially when you consider the price tag of just $14.99 for this item. But we're just scratching the surface. Let's move on to our next viral viral tool. This is the Pittsburgh 9-inch drill press locking clamp. Let's give it a look. You know, I went to a store the other day that sells door locks for little people. Low key, it was pretty nice. So if you look at my drill press table, you're going to find that there's all sorts of quick clamps around the edges holding things down. And this works okay, but it becomes a little bit difficult when I need to hold something down in the center of my table. And this is exactly why I decided to get this locking drill press clamp. Let's get this thing out of the box to get a closer look at how this works. So my first impressions with this clamp is it looks like one of my dad's old adjustable clamps combined with a face clamp, and that's basically what it is. But the real power of this clamp has everything to do with the little round nut on the very bottom of the clamp. If we remove that round knob entirely, we can head over to the drill press and take a look at how this works. By simply taking the bolt of the clamp and sliding it through your drill press table, you can reattach that round nut to the very bottom to secure the clamp in place. And with that clamp secured to your drill press table, you can quickly and easily secure small pieces of wood right to the center of your drill press table, making doing some of your detailed drilling work a heck of a lot easier and safer. And you can accommodate a variety of different size stock with its maximum jaw opening of 2 inches and a throat depth of 3 inches. And any tool with this much flexibility and promotes safety is a no-brainer in my book. And at only $11.99, I can totally understand why this tool is so popular. But let's move on to our next viral Harbor Freight tool. This tiny little guy is the Pittsburgh Mini Utility Knife. Let's give it a quick look. You know, if you ever get in a knife fight with a bunch of clowns, you always go for the juggler. So this is one of those items when I first saw it, I thought it might be a toy. But I'm pretty sure you're going to want to keep this away from children. Let's get it out of the box and take a look. Now at first glance, this may look like any other utility knife, but when we compare it to a full-size one, you can begin to see how small this is. That's right, this utility knife when folded down only has a length of 2.5 inches, which not only makes it perfect to fit in your pocket, but also can be used as a keychain. If we take a closer look at the utility knife, you can see it works like any other knife. You simply press on the spine to remove the blade and it locks into place. Now since we're dealing with a smaller knife, it's obviously going to need smaller blades, and you can see the size difference between a normal size blade and this blade, which was honestly one of the few things that concerned me about this tool when I got it, but when I looked on Amazon, these blades are available from them. But you won't need blades right away, as it does come with 5 blades right in the box, and the blades on this knife are just as easily replaced as a normal utility knife. Simply pull up on the tab on the back and the front, and you can see how the blade is locked into place with the hole right in the middle. And since each one of these blades has 2 sides on them, you can get twice the lifetime out of these blades. And with the knife fully extended, you're still looking at a length of about 4 inches, which is still comfortable enough to cut with. And because this item has all the features of a regular size utility knife at a fraction of the size, I can totally understand why this tool has become viral. And with this knife only being $5.49, this is definitely worth picking up. In fact, it might be a great stocking stuffer. This is the Bauer 30-piece jigsaw blade set. Let's check it out. Did you hear about that lady that backed up into a jigsaw blade? Yep, disaster. So I've recently picked up a couple of jigsaws, and frankly, one thing that I always lose are the blades for these saws. So when I saw this jigsaw blade set, I thought it was a great way to stock up to make sure that I always have a blade. And I think you'll be impressed at what this set comes with. Let's take a closer look at the box so that we can get a better understanding. You'll first notice there's a lot of different blades here with a lot of different sizes, with the smallest being 3 inches long and the largest being 6 inches long. And there's all sorts of blades in here, everything from down cut to up cut to even some carbide grit blades. And if you're curious as to the exact specs of all these blades, you can see all the details right here. And one of the nice things about all 30 of these blades is they all have that same T-shank design, which almost every jigsaw on the market today accommodates this style. But the 30 blades aren't the only thing that come with this set. This last item is something that's perfect for me. That's right, there's actually a tiny drawstring bag that's big enough to hold all those 30 blades, making sure that I know exactly where my blades are and prevent me from losing them all the time. And it's exactly for this reason that this 30-piece jigsaw blade set has become viral from Harbor Freight, especially when you consider the price of just $14.99, which is about 50 cents a blade. But let's move on to our next Harbor Freight viral tool. This is the Pittsburgh 3/4 inch pipe clamp with base. Let's give it a look. You know, that reminds me, what's 7 inches long and hasn't been sucked in over 13 years? Whitney Houston's pipe. So when it comes to pipe clamps, there's one brand that rules the game, and that is Bessey. But when I saw these Pittsburgh ones, I thought they looked a heck of a lot like those Besseys, so I knew I had to give them a try. Now before we dive into this pipe clamp, I do want to make two distinctions. First off, this is a 3/4 inch pipe clamp, and secondly, it does have a base. These are two very important attributes that you're going to want to have with these Pittsburgh clamps, but let's get this thing out of the box and take a closer look. Now if you've never worked with pipe clamps before, these are extremely easy to set up. The first thing that you're going to need is a piece of 3/4 inch pipe. Then you simply take one of the threaded ends of the pipe and screw it into the side of the pipe clamp that has the screw latch. And once that side's attached, simply attach the other clamping jaw by depressing the silver tabs on the spine. Now that we have our pipe clamp together, let's first take a look at how this compares to the Bessey by first taking a look at the screw clamp head. And as you probably noticed there's very little difference between these two clamping jaws. Not only do they both have that rotating handle, but they also have a spot for your thumb on the opposite side to give a little bit more pressure. And both jaws have the same range of motion of about 2¼ inches. And if we look at the feet of the screw jaw side, you can see the Bessey has got a T-shaped design while the Pittsburgh has got an L shape. And finally, let's look at the clamping jaws themselves. Now if you're familiar with Bessey, they do come with these plastic caps that always tend to slide off. But the Pittsburgh doesn't come with any, which actually may be a better idea, as it's got these two holes where you can add screws and a wood block to make your clamping jaw yourself. And if we look at the other clamping jaw of this pipe clamp, you can see that the Bessey and the Pittsburgh are almost identical, except for that plastic sheath and the two drill holes on the Pittsburgh. And really, other than those items, I'm seeing no major differences between these two clamps, other than the price, with the Pittsburgh being about 25% cheaper. And although I love Bessey, I can totally see why these cheaper Pittsburgh clamps have become viral. But let's move on to our next Harbor Freight tool, which is about as simple as it gets. This is the Pittsburgh Orange Dead Blow Hammer. Let's give it a look. Dead, huh? I still remember the day when they pronounced my dad dead. Can't believe I pronounced it wrong all those years. Now at Harbor Freight, they've got a ton of different varieties of this type of hammer, including all different types of weights. But I went with the 1-pound version of this hammer because I liked its smaller size. Let's talk about some of the unique features of this dead blow hammer. One of the first things you'll probably notice is its orange color. It's this color that's going to make this thing a heck of a lot harder to lose. And this orange colored hammer is made of PVC material, so it's going to resist most of the chemicals you might throw at it. And not only does the handle got a very nice, comfortable, non-slipping grip, but it's also got a steel core. But let's take a closer look at the head of this hammer, as it's got a non-marring surface. Not only that, but if you wanted to use this in the garage, its softer surface prevents sparking when it's in contact with things like concrete. And you can even hear the added weight they incorporated into the head of the hammer if you give it a shake and put your ear up to it. And with so many different size and weight options with this hammer, I don't think you can afford to overlook this Harbor Freight viral dead blow hammer, especially when you consider the price of this 1-pound mallet at just $6.99. Now those were all the viral items that I picked up from Harbor Freight that were less than $15 a piece, but I ended up picking up 2 more items. And these last 2 items are a little bit random, but I still think they're worth picking up. You know, I'm pretty good at remembering random facts. Did you know there's over 3,500 different types of lice? And that's just off the top of my head. This is the US General Magnetic 5-outlet power strip. Let's give it a look. So this little gem was found in an area with all sorts of magnetic tools. And although a little bit more pricey at just under 34 bucks, I knew I needed to check it out. Now, although this may look like any other power strip, there are 3 unique features that really got me about this tool. The first thing is that along with those 5 outlets, there's also 2 USB-A ports for a more modern workshop, which I'm noticing the more time goes on, more of my tools are requiring this type of outlet. Secondly, if we look on either end of this power strip, you'll see there's a couple of hooks. These hooks are meant to be a cord wrap so that you can get your electrical cord out of the way when it's not in use. And finally, the third and final feature that set this power strip apart are the 2 non-marring magnets on the very back. It's these magnets that allow you to add a power strip to some of your most used areas in your shop, like your table saw or your router table. And it's because of this power strip's ability to give you the power you need where you need it that it's become so viral at Harbor Freight. And there's one more viral item item that I picked up from Harbor Freight on my last trip, and I didn't pay a cent for it. And this item is a tool that I've already featured on one of my previous viral Harbor Freight tool videos. If you don't have one of these, this is something you're definitely going to want to pick up. This is the US General 18-inch magnetic tool holder. This item was a free gift that I got for spending over $100 on my latest trip. And I have these things all over my shop, whether it's over at the router table to hold those extra router bits, or if it's over at the drill press to hold those extra drill bits. And this item retails for only $4.99, so even at that price, it's a great pickup for your shop. So whether holding wrenches or bits, I think you can understand why this tool has become viral from Harbor Freight. This is the Warrior self-centering doweling jig. Let's give it a look. Did you hear about the Roman warrior who ate his wife after battle? At first he felt bad, but in the end he was glad he ate her. So I've covered a lot of doweling jigs on this channel in the past, and one of my favorites is the Going Make one, which has a lot of features that normal doweling jigs just don't have. But that jig had one problem: it wasn't able to self-center itself on your material. And I have purchased a self-centering jig in the past, but there's one problem with it: it costs well over $150. And although this was the most expensive item I picked up today, it was still only $35. So let's get this 7-piece doweling jig out of the box and see how it operates. So the 7 items that are included inside the box are the doweling jig itself, as well as 6 drill collars that you can attach to the doweling jig. And if we compare this Warrior doweling jig to my more expensive one, you can see they're almost identical, with one key difference. And that has to do with the length of the screw knob that opens and closes the jaw of this jig. Instead of being able to accommodate material thicker than 5.5 inches wide like my more expensive jig, this jig can only accommodate material up to 2.5 inches. But I can tell you for a fact I've never used that more expensive one on material thicker than an inch wide. So this Warrior jig is made of 2 different types of material. The body itself is made out of aluminum, and the drill guides are made out of hardened steel. And there's 5 different size dowels you can use with this jig, including 1/4 inch, 5/16, 3/8 of an inch, 7/16, and 1/2 inch dowels, which are included into the base of the tool. And to use any of the 3 smaller dowel sizes, all you do is you screw the drill guides into the frame of the tool. And it clearly labels on the side of the tool where the 3 smaller drill guides go and where the 2 larger ones are. And if we look below those windows, you're going to find a couple of windows. These windows give you a reference line to show you exactly where you're going to drill your hole for those dowels. And the mechanics of this jig are super simple. All you need to do is to take the jig and straddle it over your workpiece. And once the jig is in place, you simply twist the knob on the side, and you'll notice that both of the edges come together evenly so that those drill guides are right in the center. Then it's just a matter of finding the appropriate drill bit and drilling out your holes. Then you can twist the knob, remove the jig, and you can see how perfectly centered those dowel holes are, making this an incredible and affordable option from Warrior for a self-centering doweling jig. Well, I wish I would have seen that Warrior jig before I spent an arm and a leg on my first self-centering jig, but we've got more tools to take a look at. This is the self-centering drill press jig. Let's give it a look. Speaking of centering, I bet working at a job center has to be tense, knowing if you get fired, you gotta come in the next day. So if you've ever tried to drill into round stock, you know it can be quite difficult. And right now, the only way that I can effectively do it is with the V-groove on the bottom of my drill guides. And I'd really like to be able to do this over at my drill press. So when I saw this little guy, I thought I'd give it a try. If we take this bad boy out of the box, you can see it's a pretty simple design. It's basically an enormous V-groove. And since it is such a simple design, the price of this thing is really low, coming in at under $9. If we look at the tool, you can see it's made of extruded aluminum, and it's got a 90-degree angle that's off kilter by 45 degrees. It's this V-groove that's going to allow you to place almost any size round stock right into the center of the jig. You'll also notice on the very top of the jig, there's not only an imperial scale, but also a metric scale going about 5 inches. Not only that, but you'll also notice it's got a wing on either side of the jig that you can hold this thing down with clamps, and it's also got a few notch holes for some bolts, which can be perfect to mount this thing either directly to the table of your drill press or to a mounting board. And any way you use it, all you have to do is to place your round stock into the jig, line up your drill bit, and drill out your hole. And just like that, you have an accurate and stable, precisely drilled out hole. And for just a few bucks, I think this is a great pickup for anyone with a drill press. So I'm pretty pleased with the first 2 items we've taken a look at, but we've got a heck more to check out. Let's move on to our next. This is the Pittsburgh 1/4 inch drive finger ratchet set. Let's give it a look. That finger set reminds me of the waiter at the Golden Corral that got his finger stuck in the dishwasher. Yep, boss ended up firing them both. So this is an item, to be honest, I hadn't seen before, and I thought it was such a great idea. And if there's anybody who hasn't seen this item before, I thought it was worth checking out. Let's take a look at this 18-piece set. So what the heck is a finger ratchet set? Well, it really is pretty simple, and it has everything to do with this round little tool. This little piece works like any other ratcheting tool. As you can see, you can twist it in one direction, and with a little twist of the black knob, you can twist it in the other direction. And this is a dual-sided tool with the ability to handle hex bits on one side and a 1/4-inch drive on the other. And this tool comes with a ton of accessories, including 10 hex bits, 6 sockets, as well as an extension socket. And if you click a hex bit into one side of the tool, you can see you can work in very cramped places with a clearance of just over 2 inches, allowing you to hand tighten in screws into extremely tight spots that you normally couldn't get into. And the sockets work in the same fashion by simply clicking it into the opposite side of the tool, having a clearance of 2.5 inches with the socket itself and 4 inches with that extension. And at only $7.99, this thing is a true bargain, and because of that reason alone, I think it might be a great pickup for your shop. Well, we're getting through them today. Let's take a look at the second most expensive item I picked up. This is the Pittsburgh ratcheting screwdriver set. Let's give it a look. What's the difference between a screwdriver and Bill Clinton? Well, a screwdriver turns in screws and Bill screws in turns. So as I just said, this is the second most expensive item I picked up today, but at just $12.99, this won't break the bank. Now there are a few reasons why I got this set, one of which is it comes with a lot of bits, 24 to be exact. And if we dive deeper into what type of bits are included, you'll notice that there's 6 Torx bits, 6 nut driver bits, 5 slotted bits, 4 Phillips bits, and 3 posi drive bits. And if we remove one of these driver bits, you can see they're extended bits, having a length of about 2.5 inches long. And since this is a 26-piece set, there's obviously 2 more items, one of which is a screwdriver itself, and the other item is what sold me on the kit. And that is the Velcro carrying case. Not only can you store all those bits, but you can also store the screwdriver itself. And having all these items where you can simply fold it up for your next use just prevents all those bits from getting lost. And the screwdriver not only has a very comfortable rubber dimpled grip, but it also has a stationary setting and a ratcheting forward and backwards. And whether you use this in your shop or your home, this screwdriver set is just great value. This is the Gordon 13-piece precision knife set. Let's give it a look. You know, a mugger once held me up with one of those and demanded all my money. Wasn't too bad though, I just drew him up a map to my ex-wife's house. So this is an item that I didn't even realize I didn't have until I was working on a project with my son. For Christmas, he got a model rocket kit and the instruction called for a small utility knife. Now I made it work with a regular utility knife, but this is something that I thought I should have in my inventory. So when I saw this thing for less than $5 at the freight, it was a no-brainer to pick one up. So let's pull this thing out of its packaging and see what it comes with. Now one of the first things you'll notice is it does come with a hard shell carrying case. And if we open up that case, you can see all the blades are stored right on the top. And there are a lot of them here. In fact, there's 10 on the lid and 3 attached to the handles themselves. And not only do the ones on the lid have a cutout so that you know where to place each blade, but there's also a magnetic strip on the very bottom to hold those blades in place. If we look on the bottom of the case, you're going to notice there's 3 different handles with different size diameters. So depending on what type of material you're cutting through, you can pick the perfect handle for the job. If we look at the bottom of any of the blades, you can see there's a little notch cut out into the very frame of the blade. It's this notch that's going to secure your blade into one of any of the 3 handles. To exchange the blade, simply rotate the knob on the top of the handle to the right to loosen it up so that you can remove the blade. With that blade now removed, you can insert your new blade into the shaft of the handle and rotate the knob on the top to the left to tighten it down. And just like that, you're ready to move on with your cutting into any material. And it really is the versatility of knives that are included with this set, along with the very affordable price, that I think make this a great pickup for any shop. Our next item was kind of an impulse buy, as they had these all over the store as well as checkout. This is the Luminar compact pop-up lantern. Let's give it a look. You know, in the 1800s, cowboys used to hang lanterns off their saddles at night. Yep, it was the first version of satellite navigation. So if you see this in the store, you may not initially know what it is, as it just looks like a black cylinder. But indeed, it is much more than that, as this is a compact pop-up 500 lumen lantern. Instead of having an on and off switch with this light, you simply pull up on the top of it and the lantern is instantly exposed with the light being on. And just as easily, you simply turn this thing off by simply closing the top. And because there's nothing blocking any of the sides of this lantern, you have 360 degrees of light wherever you need it, making it perfect for lighting up those smaller areas where you may need light in several directions. And I really like the fact that it's got a flat base so that you can sit this on a flat surface, and it even has 2 metal loop handles so that you can hang this thing. And it's powered by 3 AA batteries that you can find if you unscrew the bottom. So whether you use this in your shop, your home improvement projects, or even a camping trip, this is just a great deal for under $5. They truly are almost giving stuff away at Harbor Freight, but let's move on to our next item, which is just $1 more. Next up, we have the Pittsburgh Torx hex key set. Let's give it a look. You know, sometimes women are like hex screws. The more damaged they are, the more prone to stripping they are. So Torx screws are my preferred screw in my shop, so when I saw this hex key set, I thought I'd give it a try. Now if we look closer at the packaging, you'll notice that this is a tamper-proof set, which just means there's a little hole on the very bottom of each key. Now I really don't have a need for it being tamper-proof, but that little hole on the bottom shouldn't interfere with being able to use it on normal screws. Now there's a couple of things that I really like about this hex key set. The first thing is the size, being about 3 inches long. I also really like the materials it's made out of. Having an S2 alloy steel construction, polished chrome finish, and an anodized aluminum handle. And I really like the fact that it's got 7 hex keys attached to it that fold up like a Swiss Army knife, and you can see the sizes on the side of the tool. And not only does this tool feel like something that you could add to a keychain or even slip into your pocket, but it's got a very comfortable grip with little notches for your thumb on either side of the tool. And at just $6, I think this tiny little guy is definitely worth having around. Well, we're down to our last item, and not only is this item the cheapest item of the day, but it also might be the most simple. This is the Pittsburgh Stubby ball-peen hammer. Let's give it a look. You know, that hammer scares me. I was walking past a job site the other day when a guy hammering on the roof called me a paranoid little freak. Yeah, it was in Morse code. Now if we look at this tiny little hammer, it almost looks like a toy, but I use hammers like this all the time. In fact, one of my favorite hammers in my shop is my Mr. Pen hammer, which made my top 25 list of 2025. If we look at these two hammers, you can see they're very similar. Both are 8-ounce hammers and they have a length of 6 inches long. But unlike the Mr. Pen, which is a standard claw hammer, this Pittsburgh is a ball-peen hammer, which can be perfect for doing things like texturing metal on your projects. And with its non-slip rubber grip, it really is comfortable in the hand. And the handle is even made out of vibration absorbing fiberglass to prevent fatigue. And believe it or not, since I don't own a ball-peen hammer in my shop and this one was just $3.99, I knew I had to pick this one up from Harbor Freight. This is the Bauer variable speed palm router. Let's give it a look. You know, I thought Bauer only made hockey equipment, which reminds me, you know what the difference between a hockey player and my ex was? A hockey player showers after 3 periods. So if you're buying anything at Harbor Freight, you're obviously concerned about the price, and this one doesn't break the bank at under $60, which is just over a third of the price of one of my favorites, which is the DeWalt, coming in at about $155. But let's take a look at this Bauer router, get it out of the box, and see what it's all about. So inside the box, there's not a whole lot here, which is kind of nice because honestly, a lot of these accessories tend to get lost. There really are only 3 accessories, including a fence to reference the edge of your material, a dust collection chute, as well as a wrench. And you'll obviously get the router itself, which honestly feels a little bit higher quality than what I was expecting. But let's dive in a little bit deeper with that router and take a look at some of its features. Since this is a palm router, we need to talk about the size of this thing, and this thing measures up at 8 inches tall, just like many other routers. But obviously, any battery you add to this thing is going to increase its height by an inch or 2. Now let's take a look at some of the physical features of this tool to get a better idea of how it works. One of the first things that I noticed about this tool was the white sticker that's right on top of the on and off button. Now I'm sure this is for safety reasons, but it initially concerns me a bit as I'm not quite sure I want to wait 3 seconds to get this thing turned on. So let's slide a battery into the top of this tool and see what it feels like. With our battery installed, we can depress the on button and you will indeed see it takes 3 seconds to get this router started, which is a design feature I'm not quite sure about, but luckily that off button works on command. If we look right above that on and off button, you're going to find the variable speed adjustment, and this goes from 1 to 6. And with the router turned on, we can hear the speed of that router ratchet up when we go from its lowest setting of 1 all the way up to its highest setting of 6, which is its highest RPM at 30,000. Now let's take a look at the base of the router, as this one's pretty small, especially when we compare it to others. Instead of a 4-inch base like many of my other routers, this one's only at 3.5, which may cause some stability issues. And that 3.5 inches is only one dimension, as the other width is only at 3.25. But I do like the fact that this has got a rectangular base versus a round one, which is what many of my other palm routers have. If we look on the side of the base, you're going to find a little black knob, and this is used to attach the fence directly to the router. Simply loosen that knob by twisting it to the left, slide the fence right underneath the knob, and then tighten it down by twisting that knob to the right. Then it's just a matter of taking the wing nut that's on the underside of the fence and adjusting it to the width that you want to cut from the side of your material. Then by placing your fence right up against your workpiece, you can create a consistent dado that's equidistant from the side. And having a fence like this right out of the box is really something that's pretty nice, as a lot of routers don't come with this fence included. Now let's take a look at that other accessory, which is the dust collection hose or chip guard. This quickly and easily slides right over the window of the router and simply snaps into place. Then it's just a matter of attaching your dust collector and all those chips go right into your vacuum. Now that we understand the base of this tool, let's take a look at the collar of the router, as this is actually pretty nice. This collar has got a very comfortable rubber grip, which just gives you a lot more control as you go to do your routing. As many of the routers I've dealt with have a metal one, which is just a little bit less comfortable and secure. Now let's talk about how we add a router bit to this tool, and it really is just like any other router. The easiest way to exchange your bits is to remove the router from the collar. This involves a two-step process. The first thing that we want to do is to open the latch on the side. Once that latch is open, we can depress the tab on the top to remove the router. With the router now removed, we want to take a look at the side of the collet. This is where you're going to find a little black button. This is the collet lock. Simply take your router bit, slide it into the collet, and with the collet lock depressed, you can hand tighten it down. Then to fully secure the router bit, you'll simply take the included wrench, and with the collet lock depressed, you'll tighten it all the way. Then with that top tab depressed, you'll simply slide that router into the collar and then latch it down. And just like that, you're ready to begin your routing. Now let's talk about how we make adjustments to the depth of the router. To understand this, we not only need to use that latch that's on the side of the collar, but also a rotating dial that's on the top of the router. With the latch on the collar opened up, we can either rotate that dial left or right depending on whether or not we want to raise or lower that bit. And there's even a scale on the side of the router to show you how much incremental change you've made with that bit. And once you have the depth you want, you simply flip that latch into its locked position and you're ready to move on with your project. So as you can see, micro adjustments are pretty easy to do with such an affordable tool. But let's flip this tool on its side to see one of the last remaining features of this item. And that is two very bright LED lights that are instantly turned on as soon as you press that on button, and you don't have to wait the 3 seconds. And after playing around with this tool for a bit, I don't think that pause is a full 3 seconds. I would say it's closer to 1 or 2 seconds. But either way, I'll have to say I'm pleasantly surprised with this first router pickup from Harbor Freight, which is the Bauer one. But I want to see how this Bauer one compares to some of their higher end ones. Let's give our next router a look. This is the Hercules 20-volt compact palm router. Let's see what this is all about. You know, my favorite character in Greek mythology was Hercules, but you know what the sexiest woman was? Yeah, it was Medusa. She could get guys rock hard with just one look. Now before we dive into the Hercules router, I did want to talk about the price difference between the Bauer router and the Hercules router, as we're looking at about a $10 difference. So what are we getting for this extra 10 bucks? To understand that, we need to take a look at some of the differences. The first thing that I notice as I take it out of the box is there doesn't appear to be that many differences, although it has a few more accessories. Let's take a look at those accessories first to see what you get and what's extra in this kit. The first thing that I notice is that fence or parallel guide are identical in both of these routers. You'll also notice that the dust collection chute or chip guard are very similar, with one subtle difference. Unlike the Bauer that has 2 pins that simply snap into place, the Hercules only has 1 pin. With one of the pins inserted on the Hercules, you then take the screw knob to tighten it into place, giving you a more permanent hold. And just like with the Bauer, you're also going to get a wrench, but this one is 2-sided. This 2-sided wrench not only allows you to tighten the collet as usual, but it also allows you to get a grip on the frame of the tool. And when used in combination with another wrench, you can get a really tight grip on that router bit. But there's 2 more accessories, and these are actually new ones. The first one is a template guide. To use this, you first need to remove the 4 screws on the base plate of the tool. Once the screws have been removed, you can remove the base plate of the router and slide that template piece right into the base of the router. Then you can replace the base plate and secure it into place with those 4 screws. And just like that, you have a lip on the very base of your router to do some template routing. And the final accessory that's included with this Hercules router is what's called a roller guide. And I'll show you how this works in just a minute, as it kind of converts a regular router bit into a flush trim bit. Now that we've seen all those accessories, let's take a look at how a couple of them work with the tool itself. Just like with the Bauer, that fence or parallel guide works in combination with the knob on the very side of the router. But it is just a little bit more secure, as you actually have to slide it into the base plate before you slide it underneath that knob. And it's secured into place just like we saw with that Bauer with that knob on the side. Now let's take a look at that roller guide, as it actually slides into that same hole on the very bottom of the router as that fence did. And once it's in place, it locks down in the same fashion as that parallel guide. With that roller guide in place, we can begin to take a look at how it works. One of the first things you'll notice is it has two knobs, both on the side and the very bottom of the guide. The bottom knob simply attaches the roller to the frame of the tool, but the side knob allows you to make some micro adjustments. By turning that side knob, it'll move that roller left and right so that you can perfectly align it with the very edge of your router bit. Once you've made those micro adjustments, you can then use that roller similar to the same fashion that you would use a bearing with a flush trim bit, allowing you to quickly and easily flush up two pieces of material without a flush trim bit. So a pretty cool little accessory that I honestly hadn't seen before. Now that we understand all of the accessories of the Hercules router, let's dive into some of the similarities and differences between these two routers. The first thing you'll notice is the size. These things are exactly the same at 8 inches tall. Let's move on to the foot of the tool, where you're going to notice there's a considerable difference. You'll notice right away that the Hercules router has a horseshoe shape, which is very similar to the DeWalt version. Not only that, but it's a heck of a lot bigger than that Bauer, coming in at 4 inches wide by 4.5 inches deep. If we look at the collar of both routers, you'll notice that they both have that same rubber coating, which is just a heck of a lot more comfortable and gives you a lot more control. And if we look at the side of both collars, you'll notice they both have that same locking latch as well as that adjustment tab. And you remove the Hercules router from the collar in the same fashion that you did that Bauer. Both routers also have a very similar system for micro adjustments for the depth of the router bit. The Hercules also has a rotating dial that you can either move left or right depending on whether or not you want to raise or lower your bit. The only difference between the Hercules and the Bauer is that the Hercules is just a little bit more proud of the tool. If we look on the side of the router, you're going to notice a scale. This will give you the incremental change of how much you moved your router bit. However, this one's just a little bit harder to read. If we look on the side of the router, you're once again going to find the on and off switch. And just like that Bauer, this thing's got a 3-second delay from the time you press that on button until the motor starts. If we turn this router on and look directly above that on and off switch, you're going to find the variable speed settings. And this goes from 1 to 6, with 1 being the slowest and 6 once again being the highest at 30,000 RPM. But what's the difference between the routers themselves? To understand that, we need to remove the router from its collar. And here you'll start to notice some of the higher quality of the Hercules, as the Hercules has a cast aluminum outer casing while that Bauer only had a plastic casing. But on the inside of these routers, I don't think you're going to notice as many differences, as both of these have brushless motors and they should be able to tackle most of your projects. Finally, if we flip the Hercules on its side, you'll once again notice that there's two bright LED lights to light your way as you're going to do your projects. So as you can see, there's some very subtle differences between these two routers, but that's kind of expected given the price difference of only $10. But that's not exactly true, as both of these routers run on two different battery systems, which leads me into the last item I picked up when I bought these routers. Here we have a set of both the Hercules and a Bauer 2-amp-hour battery. I still think Bauer's a hockey company. Speaking of which, what's the difference between a styrofoam hockey puck and beastie? Well, one's a phony puck. So not only are both these batteries 2-amp-hour batteries, but they're also both 20-volt batteries. And the $10 difference between these two routers didn't include these batteries, so we need to include that price as well. And for these 2-amp-hour batteries, we're once again looking at a price difference of $10, giving a total price difference between these two routers of $20. And of course, they're not compatible, contrary to a lot of the information that you'll find online. And this just continues to frustrate me, as I've got way too many batteries. Now, I'm not going to sit here and bore you to death by talking about batteries, but I did want to mention one thing. One thing that's really nice about these batteries is they both have battery indicators. Instead, I want to talk about the elephant in the room and do a quick test to test the battery life on these batteries. And I want to compare the runtime of these two routers to one of the industry best routers, which is the DeWalt Palm router. So here's what I'm going to do. Not only do I have a brand new fully charged 2-amp-hour battery from DeWalt, but I also have a fully charged 2-amp-hour battery from Bauer and a fully charged 2-amp-hour battery from Hercules. And this is by no means a scientific test, but I think it will be interesting to see. Let's start off by loading up a battery into the DeWalt. With that battery now locked and loaded and the router secured, I'm going to turn that router on and start a stopwatch and see how long this battery lasts. Now, as I do this test, there's a few things to consider. First off, this router doesn't have a router bit in it, and it's not going through any wood. But given that I'll be doing the exact same thing for all 3 routers, it really shouldn't make that much of a difference. So I guess this gives me a little bit of time to work on the computer. And this initial test went on for quite some time, but the router did indeed stop right at about 15 minutes exactly. And I'm guessing if you consistently use this thing on wood like pine, you would probably get about 7 to 10 minutes of actual work time. And if you're interested in this router specifically, I tested it out a little bit further in this video right here, where I consistently went through hickory with a 5 amp hour battery and I got about 21 minutes out of it. But let's see how this DeWalt runtime on a 2 amp hour battery of about 15 minutes compares to the Bauer. Let's put a battery into the Bauer and see what happens. Now I think this will be pretty interesting to see, as I have no experience with any cordless Bauer tools. And one of my first impressions after turning the Bauer on is this thing is a heck of a lot louder than that DeWalt. But if this thing can get any significant runtime, I'll be pretty pleased. Well, that's actually kind of surprising, as the battery unit got 2 minutes and 20 seconds longer than that DeWalt unit. However, I have to remind you, this is not a scientific test. One of the things I noticed with that Bauer is as the battery got lower and lower, you could hear the rotation speed getting slower and slower. So I'm guessing if I were to apply that Bauer to wood in the last minute or so, it would probably stall. But we've got one more 2 amp hour battery to test. Let's see how that Hercules does. Now this is probably one of the routers I'm most excited to test out, because if this thing comes anywhere close to that DeWalt, it may be a great cheaper alternative. And if you remember, I complained about how loud that Bauer was compared to the DeWalt, but this Hercules is much more quiet. So if I can get about 15 minutes out of this Hercules, I'm going to be pretty impressed. Well, I don't know about you, but that's pretty impressive. Well over 5 minutes of extra runtime with the Hercules battery versus the DeWalt battery. And I could hear the audible rotation of the router maintaining its consistent speed until about the last minute, which is a real eye-opener for me, as those DeWalt batteries go for about $100 a piece, while the Hercules is only 45 bucks. This is the Pittsburgh Quick Change 4-in-1 hammer. Let's check it out. I got a quick joke for you. What's the difference between an old tire and 365 used condoms? Well, one's a good year and one's a great year. So if you're like me, you probably have a ton of different styles of mallets in your shop, and they all suit different purposes on your projects. But this Pittsburgh 4-in-1 quick change hammer is meant to be a lot more flexible, replacing a lot of those hammers you may already have. Let's take this hammer out of its packaging to see what makes this item so unique. With this item, you're going to get 5 pieces, the shaft or the handle of the hammer, along with 4 hammer heads. Now this isn't the first time I've had a hammer like this, as I reviewed the ball-peen hammer, which I use all the time a few years ago. Now that's a great hammer, however, exchanging those hammer heads isn't the easiest process. For that hammer, you actually have to use a metal tab and strike it up against your surface to remove the hammer head. Then you can add the new hammer head and pound it in place, like your mom. But this Pittsburgh hammer has a much easier process. Let's take a closer look. Let's start off by taking a look at the hammer heads that are included with this kit, including the red, green, white, and black. Each of these has a different hardness level depending on the use of this hammer. The white is the softest, with the red being medium, the green being hard, and the black being hard steel. And the handle for this hammer is made out of shock-absorbing fiberglass, and it even has a rubber handle for comfort. But by far the best feature of this hammer is the way you attach those hammer heads. As you probably already noticed, each one of those hammer heads has a threaded bolt on the very back of it. And if we look on either side of the handle, you can see there's a counterpart with a threaded insert on both sides of that handle. All you need to do is to take one of those hammer heads, in this case the white or the softest hammer head, and screw it into one side of the hammer. Then you can flip the hammer around and add your secondary head, in this case the black head, which is the steel head. And just like that, you have a dual-sided hammer or mallet with any combination that you want. And I haven't even mentioned that this hammer is less than $6, making it a very affordable pickup. So if you're looking for one hammer that can do the same thing that multiple hammers can do for an affordable price, you might want to check out this Pittsburgh 4-in-1 quick hammer. Next up, we have the most expensive item I picked up, but it's still under $30. Let's give it a look. This is the Pittsburgh 6-inch long-reach digital caliper. Let's give it a look. I got scaffolding on my digital radio and steel girders on my record player. Used to piss my ex-wife off. She told me to stop reinforcing stereotypes. So spending almost 30 bucks on any Pittsburgh item is a high dollar item for Pittsburgh, but let's check out this item and see if it's worth the price. Now I've got quite a few calipers in my shop with a variety of different price ranges, from the cheap plastic ones to the more expensive professional ones. But they all have one problem, and that's the fact that they don't have a heck of a lot of reach. In fact, almost every single one of my calipers only has a reach of about 1.5 inches. And that's exactly why I picked up this Pittsburgh long reach one. Let's get it out of the packaging and see what it comes with. So as you probably noticed, this thing does indeed come with a hard shell carrying case, which is pretty nice because I like precision tools like this to be protected. But let's open up that case to see what's inside, and as you can see, there's not a whole lot here, just the caliper itself. As we take this caliper out of the box, you can see that it works right away, as it does come included with a battery installed. Now my first impressions with this caliper is it does feel pretty high quality, as it's got a lot of weight to it, and if we look at the ruler on it, it does say it's made of hardened stainless steel. Now we're not going to go over how to use a caliper, as most calipers function in the same way, but let's take a look at the display of this caliper to see what functions it has. You'll first notice that there's 3 buttons on the display, an on and off button, a 0 button, as well as a millimeter and inch button. Now obviously the on and off button does exactly what it says, but if you forget to turn this thing off, it does turn off automatically. Now that 0 button, in my opinion, serves 2 main purposes. First off, it's a great way to calibrate the tool. By simply closing the jaws and pressing that 0 button, you can make sure that you're right at 0. The other function that I like to use that 0 button for is an incremental measurement. By simply zeroing it out and adjusting the caliper, you can get the distance between your first measurement and your second measurement. The third and final button is the millimeter and inch button, which allows you to change it from millimeters to inches. And my only disappointment with this button is it doesn't have inches with fractions, which many of my other calipers have, and just makes it a heck of a lot easier to read. If we take a closer look at the ruler of the caliper, you can see it's extremely easy to read, with that stainless steel background and the black writing. And just like any other caliper, it does indeed have a small wheel to make micro adjustments with the tool itself. And the precision of this tool is 1/100th of a millimeter or 5/10,000ths of an inch. But let's take a look at the real reason why I purchased this caliper, and that's because of the jaws themselves. You'll first notice it's got a pretty extensive reach, going to about 3 5/8 of an inch, which for me is the real reason why I got this tool, as I intend on using this caliper to verify my measurements on tools like my lathe. This extended reach allows me to straddle my workpiece and verify my measurements, making sure that my lathing projects are consistent. And if we look at the very tips of the jaw, you can see they have 2 different shapes, with the top jaw being pointed to get into some of those harder to reach spots and the bottom jaw being flat. But none of this is important unless this thing is accurate, so let's grab a couple of setup blocks, not only for imperial but also metric, and test this thing out. And as you can see, as I use that 3/4 inch setup block, this thing is dead on accurate. And the same holds true with that 16mm metric block. And for me, a precise caliper like this with an extended reach for about 30 bucks is just a great pickup from Harbor Freight. But let's move on to our next item, which is just a little bit less high tech. This is the Doyle 6 1/4 inch level. Let's give it a look. You know, my ex-wife used to always say she was lightheaded from low iron levels. So like any good husband, I did the right thing and raised her ironing board. I think that was the beginning of the end. So I've picked up a couple of Doyle products in the past, and if this thing is anything like those, I'll be pretty impressed. And this thing really stood out to me when I saw it on the shelves at Harbor Freight, so when I saw it, I knew I had to pick it up. Let's get this thing out of the packaging so that I can show you what caught my eye. Now this thing is intended to be used as a conduit level, perfect for any electrician that needs to bend some conduit. But for me, I see it as a valuable addition to any shop. Let's take a closer look at the tool. The first thing you'll notice is there's 4 bubble levels with this tool at 4 different angles, which is something that I hadn't seen with other levels. Now with most standard levels, you're typically going to find a 0 and 90-degree level. And if you're lucky, sometimes on the smaller levels, you can even find that 45. And this Doyle level not only has that 0 and 90-degree bubble level, but it also has that 45. But along with those 3 standard bubble levels, the Doyle actually has a 4th, and that's at 30 degrees. And although not an angle I use all the time in my shop, it's just more functionality in a small little tool. If we look on one end of this level, you're going to find a brass knob, and this is where you would go to insert some conduit and clamp it into place. Then you can take a bending tool and bend that conduit until you get the perfect angle you want. If we look on the other side of the level, you're going to find a 45-degree chamfer. This chamfer allows you to get into tight spaces and can even be used as a reference point for things like your table saw blade. And it could even be used to setting the angle on things like your T-bevel. Another nice thing about this Doyle level is what's on the very bottom of it. Not only does it have a small 4.5 inch ruler with 1/8 inch increments, but if we flip it upside down, you can see there's even another feature. This level has got 4 very powerful rare earth magnets on the very base of it, which are perfect to put on any cast iron tabletop in your shop, like your bandsaw, your drill press, or even your table saw, making sure that that level doesn't move on you when you go to adjust that tabletop. And finally, if we remove that bronze knob from the top of the level, we'll see that there's one more feature. And that's the fact that there's also a V-groove on the very top of the level, which could not only be used for conduit, but also round stock like dowels. And it's because of all the versatility of this level for less than 20 bucks that I think it's a great pickup from Harbor Freight. But we're not even close to being done yet. Let's dive into our next tool, which is a little bit more high tech. This is the Centec 1000 gram digital scale. Let's give it a look. What's the difference between a gram of cocaine and a 4-year-old? Well, we all know Eric Clapton wouldn't have let a gram of cocaine fall out that window. So no, this is not so I can have a secondary business that runs out my back door, but it's actually a tool that I use quite a lot in my shop. Now, if you don't have a digital scale in your shop, you probably want to get one, as I use my current digital scale way more often than I thought I ever would. One of the main ways I use a scale like this is when I'm mixing up epoxy, as it's a great way to make sure that you have equal parts in 2-part epoxy. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I'm constantly checking the weights of various tools to get a comparison. But let's tear into this Centec box and see what this scale comes with. So for all of us that are not drug dealers and use Freedom units, you're probably wondering how much is 1,000 grams? Well, it's about 2.3 pounds, which is obviously the capacity with this scale, and that's just about the right amount when mixing things like epoxy. Now, as I got this thing out of the box, one of the first things I noticed is it has a nice little feature, and that's the fact that it's got a protective shell that you can place right on top of the scale, which is not only great to protect the tool, but also keep all that dust out. But let's remove that shell and take a look at the scale itself, starting off by looking at the pad. The pad on this scale, or the platform, is made out of stainless steel, which is not only going to prevent corrosion, but also protect the tool itself. If we look at the controls of this scale, you can see that there's 4 buttons. Let's take a closer look at what those buttons do. The first button is the on and off button, which does exactly what it says. But if we turn this tool on, you can see that it has a backlit LED display that's very easy to read. The button just to the right of that on and off button is the tare button, which is perfect for calibration. And there's 2 ways that I like to use this button. One of the first ways is to zero it out so that it reads 0 when there's nothing on that scale. But it's also really nice to use when you're using a container to hold the material that you want to get a weight on. Once your container is on that scale, you can press the tare button to zero it out so that you get a weight on just the material you placed into that container. Now let's take a look at the second row of buttons, which is where we're going to find the mode button. This scale actually has 6 different measurements you can weigh with this scale. Let's take a look at what those measurements are. As I press the mode button, you can see all 6 of these different units, including grams, ounces, grains, pennyweights, troy ounces, and even carats. And I thought imperial was confusing. I'll probably just stick to ounces. And the final button is the PCS button, which is a unique way to measure things that I hadn't seen before. This is mainly used to get a count on really small items. You'll first take a quantity of either 25, 50, 75, or even 100 smaller items and place it on the scale, and then you'll press the PCS button and hold it for 3 seconds. Then you'll press the mode button to select how many tiny items you've placed on that scale, and once that number is correct, you'll press the PCS button again to lock it in. Then you can place any number of these tiny little items onto the scale, and the scale will give you a readout of the count of those items, which is a pretty neat little feature that I hadn't seen before, especially if you deal with a lot of small items. And surprisingly enough, this scale with all those features is under 13 bucks, and for this reason alone, I think it's a great pickup for any shop. The next item I picked up was a unique storage solution that I thought was at a very affordable price. This is the Storehouse 12-drawer storage organizer. Let's give it a look. 12 is my favorite number, most likely because of my baby's mama. Yeah, she's got a birth defect and has 12 breasts. I'm one lucky guy, but it does sound a little bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? So when I saw this, it kind of looked like the cousin of one of my favorite Harbor Freight tools, and that's the US General Mini Toolbox. Only this thing has got a heck of a lot more compartments and may be perfect for storing some of your hardware. Now I've got a similar item to this that was made by Craftsman that's already in my shop. The problem with this item is it was pretty expensive, coming in at well over 25 bucks. And this Storehouse organizer is just under 10, so let's get it out of the packaging and take a closer look. Now, as we already mentioned, this is a 12-drawer organizer, but there's two different sizes of drawers. There's 8 smaller drawers as well as 4 larger ones. Let's start off by taking a look at the dimensions of both of these drawers, starting off with the smaller ones. These drawers have a width of 2 inches, a height of 1.5, and a depth of 5.25. And the larger drawers have the same dimensions, only they have a width of 4 3/8 of an inch versus 2. If we look at the cabinet for this organizer, you're going to notice a couple of nice features. Let's start off by taking a look at the back. Here you're going to find 4 keyhole slots so that you can attach this thing to your wall with 4 screws so that you can place it just about anywhere. Another nice feature of this item has to do with the drawers themselves and is located on the very front of the cabinet. On the very front of the cabinet for each drawer, there's 2 little yellow nubbins, and these allow you to lock the drawer into place with a simple click, making sure that all your hardware or smaller tools is secured in place when stowed away. And this cabinet is just about the perfect size for any countertop, being about 9 inches tall by 10.5 inches wide by 6.25 inches deep. And this 12-drawer organizer is just as rugged as my Craftsman, and for this reason alone, I think it's a great pickup from Harbor Freight. Well, we're down to our last item or items, which I think are definitely worth checking out at Harbor Freight. These are the small items that are definitely worth checking out when you go to Harbor Freight. Let's give them a look. What's the difference between Bill Cosby and a small fencing sword? Well, one's a little rapier. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time looking at each one of these items individually, but I do think they're worth checking out next time you hit the freight. First off, let's talk about 5-inch hook and loop orbital sandpaper that's perfect for your sander. Specifically, I think it's worth checking out lower grits like 60 or 80 grit, as this is the type of sandpaper that I use for a short period of time when roughing out my surfaces and then throw it away. Now, when I purchased both of these packs of 80 grit sandpaper, I purchased both the Bauer and the Hercules, and there's about $1 difference between these two brands. If we take one of the sanding discs out of each box, you can see they have the exact same design, and this is because they're universal and can fit almost any 5-inch orbital sander. But other than the color difference, what's the difference between these two brands of Bauer and Hercules? The Bauer actually uses a premium zirconia grit, while the Hercules uses a ceramic alumina grit, which may make it a little bit more ideal when sanding through things like paint. But frankly, for disposable sanding pads like this, I don't think you can go wrong with either one. In the same fashion, I would also recommend picking up some of their higher grit sanding sheets. Now, these are wet-dry sanding sheets, and in my case, I went with 600 grit, but if they had 400 grit, I probably would have went with it. Now, you could use these higher grit sanding sheets for things like sharpening your chisels, but I like to use them to get the rust off my cast iron surfaces. And I even use this exact same type of sandpaper to smooth out my bandsaw tabletop that came machined a little rough from the factory. And for just over $5 for this 5-pack of high grit sandpaper, I think it's definitely worth checking out at Harbor Freight. Now let's talk paintbrushes, as I picked up this one which has a unique design. This Avanti paintbrush is one of their best quality paintbrushes, but the reason that I liked it was because of the handle. This little guy has probably got one of the most ergonomic handles I've ever seen. Not only does it have a small hole on the very tip of it so that you can hang it out to dry, but it also has a very comfortable grip. With its smaller rubber handle, it fits right between your index finger and your thumb and gives you a heck of a lot more control. And for just over $6, I think it's definitely worth picking up one of these next time you hit the freight. Last but not least are some drill bits, as I have a couple of sizes that I'm constantly losing. And it's because of this that I picked up these 2 sets of 7-piece Warrior drill bits. The nice thing about these bits is that they're titanium coated, which just means they're going to run a little bit cooler. Now, these might not be the highest quality bits you could possibly buy, however they do what they're supposed to, and that's to replace my bits I've lost around my shop. And since each one of these packs is just $1 or $2, these things are almost disposable, and I think it's definitely worth checking them out at Harbor Freight. Well, I hope you enjoyed all of these tools, and peace out.